What happens when a broken rancher, haunted by silence and loss, opens his gate to a dying stranger in the middle of a Montana blizzard? Could this desperate encounter melt years of grief, awaken forgotten hope, and change the meaning of silence forever? Would you risk everything to find out? The silence of the Montana plains in deep winter was a living thing, a vast heavy presence that pressed in on all sides, broken only by the mournful sigh of the wind as it scoured the endless canvas of white. For me, Josiah Colt, this silence had been my only steady companion for 8 long years. It was a shroud I had pulled over myself, a penance for a past I couldn't outrun. It filled the corners of my sturdy log cabin, sat with me at my solitary meals, and laid beside me in my cold, empty bed, an invisible weight on my chest. I had come to accept it, to believe it was the only thing I deserved. I stood on my porch, a hulking figure wrapped in a thick sheepskin coat, watching the snow fall. It wasn't a gentle, picturesque snowfall. It was a determined, methodical assault intent on burying the world and all its sharp-edged memories under a blanket of soft, unforgiving white. The steam from my tin mug of coffee was a fleeting prayer, a warm breath of hope, but the biting wind snatched it away before I could even see it rise. My ranch, the Triple C, was a lonely island in a frozen ocean, its fences stretching out like the ribs of a great fallen beast. This land had taken everything from me, and in return I had given it my surrender. My days were a repetition of grim tasks. I'd rise before the sun, the cold air a slap to my face, and head out to the barn. The horses, bless their simple hearts, were my only company. I'd feed them, talk to them in a low murmur, my voice a forgotten instrument. The barn smelled of hay and leather and life, a scent that was a bitter counterpoint to the sterile emptiness of the cabin. I'd check the fences, a futile act against the endless wind, and chop wood, until my muscles ached, the physical labor a desperate attempt to outrun the pain in my mind. The nights were the worst. The cabin, which Abigail had filled with laughter and the scent of lavender and bread, was now a tomb. Her rocking chair sat by the hearth, a silent sentinel. I never touched it. I never opened the door to Danny's room. It was locked from the outside, the key buried somewhere beneath the porch, a final definitive barrier between the man I was and the man I used to be. The silence was my friend and my jailer. It had a sound of its own, a low hum of desolation that was a constant reminder of my failure. It was the sound of a world without them. That's when I saw it. A smudge of darkness against the stark white, moving with a staggering, unnatural gait. I squinted my eyes, so used to the vast expanse, straining to make sense of the anomaly. It wasn't a wolf, not a deer straying from the timberline. It was human. A shock, cold and sharp as a knife, lanced through me. No one used the old North Trail in winter. The county road was a full day's ride south. To be out here on foot in a storm like this was not a matter of being lost. It was a death sentence. The figure fell, disappeared into the snow, and for a moment I felt a familiar, cruel relief. The land has claimed it. Not my problem. But then it rose again, a testament to a stubbornness that even the Montana winter couldn't immediately extinguish. It was a slow, torturous pilgrimage toward my fence line. A cold, hard knot tightened in my gut. I had a rule, a law carved into my heart. With the sharpest edge of grief, I did not get involved. Involvement was a door I had locked and thrown away the key. Helping people was a fool's errand, a game whose price was too high. I'd played it once, and it had cost me everything I held dear. Just walk away, Josiah, a voice inside my head snarled. Turn your back. This is what you do now. But then another voice, a gentle echo from a lifetime ago, cut through the howling wind. It was her voice. Abigail. Her voice was like warm honey in summer sunlight, and it was the sound I ached to hear most in the world. You have a good heart, Josiah Colt. Don't ever let the world make it hard. The memory was so vivid, so painful, I felt a physical pang. I saw her face, her eyes filled with that pure, unwavering faith in me. Her words were a ghost, a tormenting whisper, and they made the knot in my gut twist with a violent ache. They were a challenge to everything I had become. With a curse that was swallowed by the wind, I set my mug down, the tin clattering against the porch rail. I pulled my hat lower and trudged out into the storm. The snow was knee-deep, the cold, a physical thing that stole the breath from my lungs. Each step was a battle, and with each step I felt the walls I had built around myself begin to crack. As I drew closer, the figure resolved into the frail shape of a young woman. Her hair was a wild tangle of black, laced with snow like a funeral shroud. The coat she wore was thin and torn, a pathetic insult to the lethal cold. Her feet, wrapped in rags that had long since frozen through, left faint bloody prints in the snow. She reached my fence, and collapsed against it, her body surrendering at last, her breath coming in shallow, ragged clouds. I stopped a dozen feet away, my stance wide, unapproachable. I saw her face waxen and pale, her lips a bruised shade of violet. Her eyes, pools of deep, endless shadow, stared at me without recognition. They were the eyes of a soul already halfway to the other side. My voice, when it came, was a rusty growl torn from a throat long accustomed to silence. "This is private land. You're trespassing." The words were meant to be a barrier, a warning to turn back, but they sounded hollow even to my own ears. The words seemed to take a moment to penetrate her fog of cold and exhaustion. Her head lifted with an agonizing slowness, her eyes focused on me, and for a single stunning moment, a spark of pure, uncut defiance flared in their depths. With a strength I couldn't fathom, she pushed herself up, her raw hands gripping the splintered wood of the fence post. "Water." She rasped, her voice the sound of dry leaves skittering across ice. "Just water." My face was a mask of granite. "Give her a cup of water. Nothing more. Point her south. Do not get involved." I had opened my heart, once offered my trust to a man I called a friend, and in return that man had left my world in ashes. The wound was old, but it had never healed. It remained a cold, dead place inside me. She saw the refusal in my hardened expression, the unyielding set of my jaw. The tiny spark in her eyes died, snuffed out by the vast, indifferent emptiness of the landscape and the man before her. She sagged against the fence, her gaze turning toward the endless expanse of white. Her next words were not a plea, but a statement of fact. A terrible, simple truth delivered with the last of her strength. It struck me with more force than the wind. "If I die here, it won't make a sound." The words echoed in the profound silence between us, a perfect reflection of the desolation I had cultivated in my own heart for 8 years. I had thought the same of myself 1,000 times. If I were to fall in this snow, the world would not notice my passing. In this broken, dying stranger, I saw a horrifying mirror of my own soul. The wind howled a scream of desolation, whipping snow around us as if trying to erase this tiny, defiant moment of human connection. For the first time in 2922 days, I broke my own law. With a heavy sigh that felt like it carried the weight of every winter I had ever endured, I lifted the heavy latch on the gate. The groan of the frozen hinges was the loudest sound I had heard in years. "Get inside," I grumbled, my voice rougher than I intended. "Before you prove yourself right." The warmth of the cabin was an agony. It attacked her frozen flesh with 1,000 invisible needles, a searing pain that was a harbinger of life returning. She sat on a low wooden stool before the roaring fieldstone hearth, wrapped in a heavy buffalo hide that smelled of wood smoke, leather, and a faint, lingering trace of lavender she couldn't place. I could. It was Abigail's scent, a smell that had haunted my dreams for years. I thrust a steaming bowl of venison stew into her hands, and she held it with a tremor so violent she feared she would spill it. She ate slowly, mechanically, each spoonful a small victory against the cold that had nearly claimed her. I watched her, my own hands calloused and rough itching, with a desire to help her that I immediately suppressed. It was a dangerous feeling. I moved about the cabin with the silent, efficient grace of a man who knows every creak of every floorboard. I was a mountain of a man with shoulders as broad as the cabin door, and hands that looked capable of splitting logs or calming a frightened horse with equal ease. My face was a testament to the harshness of the land, weathered and creased, but my eyes, the color of a stormy sea, held a deep-guarded intelligence. I didn't speak, and the silence that filled the room was not empty but thick with unspoken histories and sorrows. She didn't know my name. I had not asked for hers. It was a silent contract of anonymity, and I was grateful for it. A name was a tether to a past I was desperate to outrun. As the hours bled into one another, sensations slowly, painfully returned to her body. The thawing of her feet was a torment that brought tears to her eyes, but they were tears of life, not despair. Her mind, freed from the singular primal focus of survival, began to drift back into the shadows. I caught her staring at the locked door to Danny's room, a faint frown on her brow. I immediately moved to stand in front of it, my body, a solid, immovable shield. She lowered her gaze, her eyes meeting mine for a moment, and I saw a quiet understanding pass between us. She saw my locked door, and she knew I had one of my own. My inner monologue was a harsh one. "This is a temporary arrangement. A roof for labor. Nothing more. She'll leave when the storm breaks. You will go back to being alone. It's what you deserve." The first words I spoke to her after hours of silence were a brutal reminder of our arrangement. "You'll earn your keep." My voice sliced through the hum of the fire. She looked up. I was standing by the rough-hewn table arms crossed over my massive chest. My expression was unreadable, but my tone was not unkind. It was simply factual. She nodded, her throat still raw. I am a hard worker. We'll see, I said. Stalls need mucking. Animals need feed. The work don't wait for the weather. It was a fair trade. A roof for labor. Shelter for silence. It was a language I understood better than any other. Later that night, as she lay on a cot I'd prepared near the fire, I sat in a large, worn leather armchair staring into the flames. I was not seeing the fire. I was seeing ghosts. My own ghosts moved in the silent spaces of the cabin, their presence as real as the howling wind outside. I was seeing another blizzard 8 years gone. I'd had a wife, Abigail. She was the laughter and the light in this house, the one who planted wildflowers in the short, precious summer. She had a gentle way with the horses, a melodic hum she'd use that made them settle, and a son, Daniel, a boy of 6 with a wild thatch of blonde hair and a spirit as untamed as a spring colt. I had built this life for them, plank by plank, fence post by fence post. That winter I'd had to ride to Bighorn to register my claim. A freak blizzard, the worst in a decade, had trapped me there for a week. I'd left my new ranch hand a man. I'd trusted a man who had shared my table in charge. Keep the fires lit, Ben. See to Abigail and the boy I had instructed. But Ben had seen his opportunity. He'd loaded up my 2 best horses and a winter's worth of supplies, and vanished, leaving the cabin door unlatched and swinging in the wind. By the time I fought my way home, the fire was long dead. The cold had crept in and taken root. I found Abigail and Danny huddled in their bed, wrapped in every blanket they owned, having succumbed to the lung fever that feasts on the cold and the weak. I buried them myself on the ridge overlooking the valley when the spring thaw finally came. And in that frozen earth, I buried the best part of myself. I buried my trust, my laughter, my belief in the goodness of men. I sold off most of my herd, retreated into myself, and locked the door to Abigail and Danny's room. The silence they left behind became my penance. I glanced at the woman on the cot. In the flickering firelight, her face was soft, vulnerable. I could see the faint chain of a locket around her neck. A dangerous thought, the first of its kind in a long time, pricked at my consciousness. The silence in the cabin was for the first time not absolute. I crushed the thought immediately. I was offering shelter, not salvation. A roof, not a home. I didn't realize I'd spoken aloud until I heard my own voice, a low murmur to the flames. I made a promise. Never again. From the cot, a voice so quiet I almost thought it was the wind, replied, I am not asking for a promise. Only for the morning. The words struck me with their quiet resignation. They showed a weariness that went bone deep, a knowledge that life was a series of temporary reprieves. The days that followed fell into a Spartan rhythm dictated by the relentless demands of the ranch in winter. She, Lena, as she finally told me her name one frigid morning while breaking ice, proved to be as good as her word. She was not just a hard worker. She was relentless. She rose before me, the fire already stoked and coffee brewing by the time I came in from my first inspection of the livestock. She learned to break the ice from the water troughs without complaint, her small frame wielding the heavy iron bar with a surprising strength. She mucked out the stalls, her face set in a mask of determination. I watched her at first with suspicion, then with a grudging respect. I had given her a pair of Abigail's old work pants and a heavy wool shirt. They hung on her, but she rolled up the sleeves and cinched the waist with a bit of rope, her movements practical and efficient. I noticed the way she talked to the animals, a low, soothing murmur in a language I didn't recognize, her hands always gentle. There was a deep well of kindness in her that her harsh life had not managed to poison. Our interactions were sparse, functional sentences exchanged like currency. The feed sacks in the barn are low. I'll ride to Henderson's Crossing tomorrow. The gray mare threw a shoe. I'll fix it after the evening meal. Yet beneath the surface of this stark routine, a subtle shift was occurring. It was a thawing as slow and imperceptible as the winter ground itself. It began in the barn. I had an old bull, a cantankerous beast named Judge, that had gored more than one fence post in a fit of temper. I was the only one who could get near him. One afternoon I entered the barn to find Lena standing near the bull's enclosure, humming a soft, mournful tune and extending a handful of sweet oats through the bars. The Judge, an animal that snorted with aggression at my mere presence, was standing perfectly still, his massive head lowered, munching calmly from her hand. I stood in the shadows watching and felt a crack appear in the wall I had built around my heart. Another evening I found her by the fire, carefully polishing the small silver locket she always wore. The firelight caught the intricate floral carvings on its surface. I felt a question rise to my lips. Who was in it? But I swallowed it down, clinging to my rule of non-involvement. Still, the unspoken question hung in the air between us, a silent acknowledgement that we both had worlds we kept hidden. The real turning point, the moment the frozen ground truly broke, came a month into her stay. A new storm, a savage blizzard that the old-timers called a white death, descended upon us without warning. It raged for 2 days, imprisoning us in the cabin and barn. On the second night, a sound of acute distress rose from the barn. One of my best cows, not due for weeks, had gone into a complicated labor. For 6 agonizing hours, we fought for 3 lives in the cold lantern-lit barn while the storm screamed like a banshee outside. The calf was breached, a life-or-death situation that tested all of my experience. I can't turn it alone, I grunted, my arms deep inside the laboring mother, sweat pouring down my face despite the cold. I need you here. Hold her head, Lena. Talk to her. Keep her from fighting me. It was the first time I had used her name. Hearing it in my deep voice in this moment of crisis sent a strange jolt through her. She nodded, her own fear pushed aside by the urgency of the moment. She cradled the cow's massive head, stroking its face, her voice a low hypnotic chant in her native tongue. The words were for the animal, but the calm they conveyed was for me as well. Easy now, my sweet girl, she murmured. You are strong. You can do this. We are here with you. Working as a team, a single unit against the storm and death, we managed to shift the calf. With one last heroic push from the cow and a final desperate pull from me, the tiny creature slid into the world, steaming in the cold air. It was frighteningly still. It's not breathing, Lena, whispered her voice tight with panic. Get that sack, rub it hard, I commanded, clearing the calf's airways with my fingers. We worked frantically, rubbing the small body with rough burlap, stimulating the life within. For a heart-stopping minute, there was nothing. Then the calf gave a convulsive shudder, let out a weak, bleeding cry, and struggled to lift its head. We both sagged with relief, our bodies aching, our clothes stained and filthy. We looked at each other over the heaving flank of the mother cow, who was now licking her newborn. In the golden glow of the lantern, I saw Lena's face smudged with dirt and streaked with sweat, and it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. She gave me a small, exhausted smile, and it was like the sun breaking through the storm clouds. Back in the cabin, the adrenaline faded, leaving a profound weariness in its place. Without a word, I went to a locked sea chest in the corner, a chest I hadn't opened since Abigail's death. I returned with a dusty bottle of aged whiskey and 2 clean glasses. I poured a generous measure in each and handed one to her. She looked from the glass to my face, her expression one of quiet surprise. For the calf, I said, my voice gruff, though the excuse felt thin even to me. She took a sip, the whiskey a welcome fire in her belly. My father, she said quietly, her gaze on the dancing flames in the hearth. He played the violin. He always said that some songs were so sad they could break your heart, but you had to play them anyway. He said that's how you knew your heart was still working. She paused, then added, bringing that little one into the world tonight. It felt like one of those songs. I swirled the amber liquid in my glass. Your father sounds like he was a good man. He was, she whispered, her hand instinctively going to the locket at her throat. I did not ask what happened to her father. She did not ask why the whiskey bottle was so dusty. We didn't need to. Our pasts were still locked rooms, but for the first time we were standing together in the hallway, and the silence was no longer a void, but a shared space of understanding. As the last of the winter snows melted, the cabin began to feel less like a shelter and more like a home. The constant oppressive silence was now punctuated by the soft sounds of Lena humming as she worked, or the quiet rustle of pages as she read from a small stack of books she'd found in a dusty crate. I found myself talking more, pointing out the first signs of spring, telling her the names of the mountains that cradled our valley, stories of the ranch that I realized were stories of my life. I never mentioned Abigail or Danny by name, but Lena heard them in the spaces between my words, in the way my voice would soften when I spoke of a particular patch of wildflowers. I found myself thinking in terms of we. We need to clear that lower pasture. We should plant a garden by the creek. The thoughts were startling in their simple domesticity. They were thoughts rooted in a future that I was shocked to realize I wanted her to be a part of. The fear this realization brought was real and sharp, but for the first time in 8 years, it was accompanied by another feeling, a fragile, unfamiliar warmth. It felt a little like hope. The spring thaw arrived in a torrent, turning the frozen landscape into a world of mud and rushing water. The creek behind the cabin swelled its voice, a happy roar. Patches of determined green began to appear on the south-facing slopes, and the air lost its biting edge, carrying instead the rich, loamy scent of awakening earth. One sun-drenched afternoon while I was replacing a rotted post on the corral, I saw a rider approaching from the south. It was a rare enough sight to immediately put me on guard. Visitors were almost never good news. The rider was a man in a tailored city suit and polished boots that were ill-suited for the muddy terrain. He dismounted with an air of practiced confidence, a wide artificial smile plastered on his face. He smelled of cigars and self-importance. Afternoon, the man called out, his voice a little too loud in the quiet valley. "That's a fine piece of land you have here, friend. Sterling Croft's the name. It's not for sale," I said, my voice flat. I didn't drop the heavy mallet in my hand. "State your business." Croft's smile didn't falter. His small, shrewd eyes darted past me, scanning the cabin, the barn, the clothesline, where a few of Lena's things were drying in the breeze. "I'm not here for land. I'm a civic leader over in Gallatin County. A matter of community justice, you might say. I'm looking for a woman, an immigrant girl. Goes by a few names, I'm sure. Dark hair, quiet type. She worked for my family, and then a valuable piece of jewelry, a family heirloom, went missing. We heard a drifter of her description was seen heading this way. I felt the blood freeze in my veins. The fragile world Lena and I had begun to build was about to be trampled by this man's expensive boots. I knew with an unshakable certainty that Croft was lying. I had lived with Lena for months. I had seen the deep, unwavering honesty in her eyes. "Haven't seen anyone like that," I said, my voice a low rumble. "You're wasting your time." Croft let out a condescending chuckle. "Oh, I don't think so. A girl like that, helpless and alone, she'd naturally gravitate to a place like this. A lonely old rancher, a warm fire. It's a classic story." "It's a classic story when the man telling it is a liar," I countered, taking a deliberate step forward. "This is my property, my business. You're not welcome here." As if on cue, the cabin door creaked open. Lena stepped out, shielding her eyes from the sun. She was carrying a small basket with eggs she had just collected. She saw Croft, and all the color drained from her face. The basket dropped from her nerveless fingers, the eggs shattering in the mud. For a moment, she was the same terrified, hunted creature I had found at my fence line. Croft's smile turned into a triumphant reptilian grin. "Ah, there she is. Helena, isn't it? Or was it Anya? You see, Rancher the liar is the one hiding in your house. She has something that belongs to my wife. I'm here to take her back to town to face the sheriff. She can either return the property or—" He left the threat hanging in the air. In that instant, the dam inside me didn't just crack. It shattered. The 8 years of accumulated grief, rage, and self-imposed isolation coalesced into a single clarifying point of cold fury. I saw Croft, and I saw the embodiment of every cruel twist of fate that had destroyed my life, the random storm, the faithless friend. But this was no act of God. This was a man, a petty tyrant preying on the weak, and a man could be stopped. I moved with a sudden, surprising speed, planting my formidable frame directly between Croft and Lena. I was no longer just a grieving hermit. I was a protector. I was the master of this land. "You'll take nothing," I said, my voice deadly quiet, more menacing than any shout. "She is under my protection. This is her home now." Croft was taken aback by my ferocity. "Now, see here, you old fool. You're harboring a fugitive. I will bring the law down on this place." "You do that," I said, my voice like stones grinding together. "You bring your pet sheriff, and I'll tell him about the wealthy man who rode miles out of his way to terrorize a woman who has nothing. I'll tell him how you threatened her on my land. This valley has long memories. Croft, my family settled it. My word against yours. Who do you think they'll believe?" As I spoke, something shifted in Lena. She watched me stand before her, a human shield, and the terror that had paralyzed her began to recede, replaced by a slow-burning ember of strength. She had been running for so long. She was tired of running. She took a step forward, her chin held high. "I stole nothing from you, Mr. Croft," she said, her voice clear and steady. "You know it and I know it. You will not haunt me anymore." Croft looked from my immovable rage to Lena's newfound defiance. He had lost. His power, the power of fear and intimidation, was useless here. He was a snake in a land of eagles. With a final venomous glare, he scrambled back onto his horse. "You'll both regret this," he spat before wheeling the animal around and galloping away, his retreat as undignified as his arrival. The silence he left behind was vast and ringing. Lena stared at my broad back, her heart swelling with an emotion so powerful it made her tremble. I had called this her home. She walked toward me, oblivious to the broken eggs and the mud. She stopped in front of me, and with unsteady fingers she unclasped the locket from her neck. She opened the delicate silver case and held it out to me. Inside was the tiny, beautifully painted portrait of a smiling man and woman. My parents, she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. Mikhail and Elena Petrova. I looked down at the hopeful faces in the portrait. I then looked into Lena's eyes and saw not the victim, but the survivor. I saw the daughter of Mikhail and Elena, a woman of immense strength and quiet dignity. My large, calloused hand gently reached out not to take the locket, but to cup her cheek. My thumb brushed away a single tear that had escaped. My wife was Abigail, I said the names feeling both strange and sacred on my tongue. And my son, my boy, was Daniel. I had spoken their names. I had shared my most profound sorrow, and the world did not end. Instead, in the sharing, the burden felt for the first time a little lighter, a little less lonely. Lena leaned into my touch, a silent communion of two souls who had been shipwrecked by life, and had against all odds washed up on the same shore. We stood there in the mud and the sunshine, surrounded by the wreckage of the past, and the vibrant, undeniable promise of spring. The valley was a symphony of life. The wildflower garden Abigail had started, and which Lena had lovingly tended and expanded, was a riot of color. A vegetable garden which I had tilled with my own hands flourished by the creek. The sound of children's laughter, a sound long absent, now echoed from the porch. I sat in my old leather chair whittling a small wooden horse. Across from me sat Lena, her belly round with our first child due in the autumn. At her feet, a 5-year-old boy from a neighboring ranch that had fallen on hard times, a boy we were fostering and planned to adopt, played with the judge's newest, much gentler calf. We had married the previous spring in a simple ceremony on the ridge where Abigail and Daniel rested. It was not a replacement, but an addition. It was a testament to the fact that the heart, even after being broken, could grow again larger and more compassionate than before. Lena looked up from her mending and smiled at me. The guarded, haunted look was long gone from her eyes, replaced by a serene, contented light. The deep furrows of grief on my face had been softened by laugh lines. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. I held up the nearly finished wooden horse, its form smooth and perfect in my large hands. "I was just thinking about that first day," I said, my voice a low, warm rumble. "You told me that if you died out here it wouldn't make a sound." I looked at her, then at the boy, then at the life we had built together in this quiet valley. My stormy sea eyes were clear and calm. "You were wrong," I said. "If you had died that day, the whole world would have gone silent for me." She reached out her hand and I took it, our fingers lacing together in a gesture of simple, profound belonging. We had found each other in the deepest, coldest part of winter, two souls convinced we were destined for a life of silence. But together we had learned a new language. It was a language of shared chores and quiet companionship, of facing down demons and planting new seeds. It was the language of home. And in the heart of the great Wild West, it was the most beautiful sound in the world. As we grow older, life teaches us that silence can carry two very different meanings. It can be a prison where grief and regret echo endlessly, or it can become a place of healing where new life and love quietly take root. Josiah Colt believed that shutting himself away was the only way to honor those he had lost. Yet when a stranger appeared at his fence line, desperate and near death, he discovered a timeless truth. The very act of helping another soul is what saves our own. This story reminds us that no matter how deep the winter of sorrow, compassion can thaw even the coldest heart. For those who have walked through loss, the lesson is clear. Healing is not about forgetting the past, but about allowing kindness and trust to grow again like wildflowers pushing through the snow. Even in the later seasons of life, hope can arrive in unexpected ways, if only we are willing to open the door and let it in. It is never too late to find warmth, to offer shelter, and to discover that love still has the power to make the silence sing. Enjoying these epic Wild West stories? Hit subscribe for more gripping tales of bravery, conflict, and unexpected heroes. Now tap the video on screen to experience a story with a twist you'll never forget.